In tonight's news edition, the government says the subsidy on bread prices will be kept, but a new formula will be introduced to stop excessive consumption of cheap flour. President Obama says he is confident of congressional authorization of a military intervention in Syria. And Israeli police clash with Muslim worshippers at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound as Israeli provocations bring fresh Palestinian condemnation. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King has ordered the government to exempt all Jordanian students in state schools from this academic year's fees. It is the 6th consecutive year that students will not have to pay the annual fee as a royal gesture to ease economic burdens on families. The government assured that it will keep the subsidy on bread prices. However, it said the current subsidy system will change with the aim of applying it to bread rather than flour, which has been excessively consumed and used for non-bread purposes due to current low prices, costing the treasury tens of millions of dinars. The cabinet said after a meeting chaired by Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour that the new mechanism is meant for the subsidy to reach targeted groups, stressing that all citizens, regardless of their incomes, will receive compensation for a price hike. The measure will see bread prices rising from 16 piastres per kilo to an expected 38 piastres. And in line with the government's strategy to reduce the energy bill, the cabinet decided to proceed with measures to use alternative energy sources for electricity generation. They included using solar cells to secure 20% of the electricity consumed by the government sector. Members of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee say they expect the panel to vote later in the day on a draft resolution for use of military force in Syria. President Barack Obama issued a blunt challenge to skeptical lawmakers to approve his plan for a military strike. But not doing so, he warned they would put America's international prestige and their own credibility at risk. Farah Ajlouni reports.
President Barack Obama is rallying the world in Congress for a military intervention in Syria. He said the credibility of the international community and U.S. Congress is on the line in the need to uphold a ban on chemical weapons and respond to Syria's chemical weapons attack. The U.S. president said he was hopeful Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is hosting a G20 summit, would change his position on Syria.
I have not written off the idea that the United States and Russia are going to continue to have common interests, even as we have some very profound differences on some other issues. And where our interests overlap, we should pursue common action. Where we've got differences, we should be candid about them, try to manage those differences, but not sugarcoat them.
However, the likelihood of a U.S. strike against Damascus increased after John Boehner, the Republican Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, and House Majority Leader Eric Cantor pledged support to Obama. British Prime Minister David Cameron told lawmakers he believes the Syrian government would use chemical weapons against its own people again if the United States stepped back from taking military action.
Last week, the House of Commons voted clearly, and I've said I respect the outcome out of that vote, and I won't be bringing back plans for British participation in military action. I agree with him we must use everything we have in our power.
Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan reiterated that Turkey would take part in any international coalition against Syria, but stopped short of saying whether that would include military action. French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius said Syria would be a risk for the entire region, but also further. The French Parliament is set to gather in an extraordinary session in which members of the Parliament will debate a military intervention in Syria. Amid the rhetoric, former Syria Defense Minister Ali Habib fled Syria. He was the most senior of President Bashar al-Assad's Alawite sect to defect. Habib had been under house arrest since resigning in protest at Assad's crackdown on demonstrators in 2011, but he managed to reach the Turkish border last night with Western help. So the most powerful nations still have different views over a military intervention in Syria. The French await for the US Congress decision, while the UK and Germany are still firm on their decision not to send their troops. All nations are discussing the Syrian issue, while world leaders are heading to the G20 summit in Russia to come to a conclusion to end the conflict. Farah Ajlouni for the news at 10.
A threatened Western strike against Damascus has again triggered a new exodus of Syrians into neighboring countries. Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, and Iraq are hosting more than 2 million refugees. Foreign Minister Nasser Joudeh, his counterparts from Syria's neighbors, to coordinate efforts of the four countries and attract more attention to the plight of refugees and the burdens posed to refugee hosts. In his address to the Geneva meeting, Joudeh warned of a further deterioration in the humanitarian situation due to the rapid developments. He said a political solution inclusive of all Syrians would end the humanitarian crisis. Joudeh handed participants a report on the repercussions of the Syrian crisis and the pressures it places on Jordan, calling for more international aid to refugee hosts. Muhammad Fuqaha has more.
Syrians who have fled the war to take refuge in neighboring countries have spoken of their wariness surrounding what action Western leaders might take in their home country. According to the figures released by the United Nations Refugee Agency, more than 2 million refugees have now fled Syria's civil war. Despite leaving behind the conflict in their country, those refugees in Lebanon say they are still struggling with daily life.
We thank
the Lebanese people. We are thankful to them. The United Nations has given us shelter and everything, but there is still nothing to work and make benefits from. We are happy here, but we suffer financially.
The same hardship is repeating itself here in Turkey, where more Syrians have crossed for fear of a potential U.S. strike in response to what the U.S. administration said was a sarin gas attack by the Syrian government that killed more than 1,400 people near Damascus on August the 21st. Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan reiterated that his country would take part in any international coalition against Syria, but he stopped short of saying whether that would include military action. The repercussions extended also to northern Iraq. Here, baby Holler was only 3 days old when her family made the risky journey of escaping from their home in the northeastern Syrian province of Hasaka into northern Iraq to flee escalating tensions in Syria. The family have set up a temporary home in a park located outside of the city of Erbil in the heart of the Iraq's northern Kurdish region. In Geneva, the four main host countries of Syrian refugees held talks with the United Nations over the crisis in Syria and were set to discuss ways to raise more international aid. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Antonio Guterres, chaired the meeting between government ministers from Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, and Turkey. The meeting comes only a day after the UN agency announced Syrian refugees had passed the 2 million mark. Guterres called it the tragedy of the century. Muhammad Al-Fuqaha for the News at 10.
Next live on the air, we have the Minister of Media Affairs and Communications, Mohammed Al-Momani. Good evening, Your Excellency.
Good evening, Nancy.
Thank you so much for the short notice interview and for joining us at News at 10.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. I would just like to ask you about the statement the Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour made to the BBC today. Could you please enlighten us more about the statement?
Of course. In fact, the Prime Minister was clear in confirming Jordan's position that Jordan will continue to stand by the political solution of the Syrian crisis. Jordan soil will not be used as a launching pad for any military strike against Syria, nor it will participate on any military action against Syria. This has been our position. With the same attitude, we strongly condemn the use of chemical weapons by any party, and we think those responsible for the use of chemical weapons should be held accountable by the international community. The Prime Minister was clear in confirming Jordan's position in that regard, though he has been misquoted in a way or another, but he clearly stated Jordan's position, as we stand by it always.
So the misquotation is definitely an unfortunate thing to happen, but that is a very strong statement. So overall, it is an optimistic thing we should look forward to.
Indeed, we continue to support the political solution for the crisis. Jordan soil will not be used as a launching pad, nor we will participate in a military strike against Syria. This has been our position, and we continue to stand by it. And this is exactly what the Prime Minister confirmed in his interview.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure peace is the way that everyone is seeking for. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for joining us.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. The Palestinian Authority condemned the latest Israeli escalation in occupied East Jerusalem. Chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Ariqat said Israel should be held accountable for its crimes, including killings, the demolition of homes, eviction of Arabs, and intensifying settlement expansion. He told foreign envoys that Israeli actions were aimed to destroy efforts underway to resolve final status negotiations and achieve the two-state solution. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry urged world nations, namely the Quartet of Middle East peace brokers, to help stop Israeli assaults against Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. The statements came after Israeli forces escorted Jewish settlers into the mosque compound and clashed with Palestinian worshippers. Hala Dababne has the story.
Muslim worshippers clashed with Israeli forces in Jerusalem's Old City as Israel brought security reinforcements into the city on the eve of the Jewish New Year. Tensions rose outside Al-Aqsa Mosque compound as Israeli troops and police restricted the entry of Palestinians into the compound, Islam's third holiest shrine. Muslim worshippers were hoping to enter the area but were prevented by police as Jewish visitors were escorted to the site in the latest in almost daily provocations. Israeli forces arrested 5 people for stone throwing and police reinforcements were brought in. In 2000, a visit by then opposition leader Ariel Sharon to Al-Aqsa compound sparked the second Palestinian Intifada. Muslim religious officials called Waqf, who administered the compound, have condemned the provocations by Jewish extremists and settlers who have the backing of the military and police.
It is severe violence against the emotions of the Muslims and against the holiness of Al-Aqsa, and this is something that we reject totally, and we cannot allow this at all.
In the Gaza Strip, more than 200 people joined a rally to condemn Israeli visits to Al-Aqsa Mosque and to call on the release of Ra'id Salah, leader of an Islamic movement in Israel. Salah was arrested on Tuesday night on suspicion of incitement following a speech last week in occupied Jerusalem. Israelis geared up to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, which will begin at sunset, as security was heightened at commercial areas and synagogues across Israel. A police spokesperson said several hundred additional security personnel were deployed, especially in public areas, over the two-day occasion. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
The tensions at Al-Aqsa reflected a grim assessment of ongoing Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. A top aide to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said the peace talks are proving pointless and will not bear fruit without much greater pressure from Washington. In the most damning Palestinian assessment to date, Yasser Abed Rabbo said the negotiations, which kicked off in late July, had made no progress. He said those negotiations are futile and won't lead to any results. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has given the two sides 9 months to work out their differences, with meetings going on in both Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank. Gunmen shot dead at least 16 members of a Shiite Muslim family before blowing up their 2 neighboring homes south of the Iraqi capital. The attack took place in the town of Latifiyah, around 40 kilometers from Baghdad, in a volatile area known as the Triangle of Death. The dead included 6 children and 8 women. It was not immediately clear who carried out the attack, but militants have been regaining momentum in their insurgency and striking with a ferocity not seen in years. Separately, a suicide bomb attacked a police headquarters in the northern city of Mosul, killing 5 policemen. A roadside bomb also struck a patrol in Tarmiya, north of Baghdad, killing 5 soldiers. Egypt's interim President Adli Mansour said emergency laws should be lifted soon and that the roadmap for a return to civilian government was on track. He also called on the international bodies to respect the will of Egyptians and to refrain from interfering in Egyptians' internal affairs. Mansour said in an interview with state television that his decision to announce emergency law had not been easy, but in his words, terrorism and the vicious war that was being practiced by some of the extremists made it crucial. He said if a gradual improvement in security continued, the state of emergency should end as planned in mid-September.
دورها أنها تخدم أو تؤدي خدمات الأمن للشعب.
The role of the security apparatus in Egypt is now limited to protecting the security and protecting the people. In terms of political issues, there is no longer a role in that. That was a period that Egypt passed through and it will not retain.
And finally, fair weather continues in most regions tonight with some partly cloudy skies and northwesterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, mild conditions prevail in hilly areas, but it will be relatively hot in the Badia and the Jordan Valley. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect hot conditions with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. The government says the subsidy on bread prices will be kept, but a new formula will be introduced to stop excessive consumption of cheap flour. President Obama says he is confident of congressional authorization of a military intervention in Syria. And Israeli police clash with Muslim worshippers at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound as the Israeli provocations bring fresh Palestinian condemnation. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.